The real Ds we were talking about, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, and Deshaun Watson. John Schneider was on Seattle Sports 710 yesterday, confirmed that DK Metcalf has permission to seek a trade. He said they've talked to a ton of teams. I don't know how many that means. ESPN's reported the Raiders have talked to the Seahawks, which would make sense because Pete Carroll, coach of the Raiders, was the guy who ripped off his shirt when DK came in for the meeting, and then they went ahead and drafted him in round 2 in 2019. I guess we're gonna do a little fill in the blank here, or complete the thought. Don't be surprised if DK Metcalf
winds up with the Las Vegas Raiders and Pete Carroll. I mean, you said you set me up perfectly. I think that will happen. John Schneider, by the way, brilliant job of this is how you sell a player. This is what you say when somebody asks for a trade. Oh, I love the guy. He's great. And we've had a ton of teams call. What does a ton mean? It could be 2, Mike. It could be 5. It could be 12. But John Schneider has the requisite enthusiasm. He's saying the right things about the player. And if it doesn't work out, we get DK Metcalf back here. A deal's going to get done. And I think it's easy enough to get a deal done with somebody that you've worked with for over a decade. That's John Schneider and Pete Carroll together in Seattle. I think this is a no-brainer. He's going to get a big contract. He's going to be a Las Vegas Raider.
The thing about Schneider's comments that, hey, if we can't work out a trade, we'll just bring him back. He described that as worst-case scenario. And maybe he wasn't thinking about what worst-case scenario means, but it's not exactly a ringing endorsement for your guy. You know, I know what his point was, hey, worst-case scenario, we have a great receiver for another year. But that just tells you they are moving toward trading DK Metcalf. And I'm still stunned to see the Seahawks at the top of the list. I think he will be traded. And Schneider said that the draft is the deadline for it. And I'm going to say don't be surprised if DK Metcalf is traded during the draft, because that would be the way to do it. That's when A.J. Brown got traded. The best time to trade a guy is when the highest pick you are acquiring for him is on the clock. Then you don't get jumped. No one's speculating. Who are you looking for? You step right in at a time where you control the board from the moment you get that pick. That is the best way to do it. And I think Schneider is skilled and sophisticated and knowledgeable enough to try to make that happen. And when he says the draft is the deadline, well, it's a deadline-driven business. Because as of yesterday, I'm thinking this is going to happen fast. I think they string this out because you want to get that pick from the team you send him to when that pick is on the clock. That's the best way to do it. So even though, right, because here's what happens. Cat's out of the bag, and we think the cat's going to run around all over the place right now. No, the cat may hang out for a while. There's other cats coming out of the bag that we can focus on, like Trey Hendrickson. So I think this could settle down, and during the draft is when the trade happens. All right, let's move on to Deebo Samuel, who will be traded to the Commanders Wednesday at 4 o'clock Eastern. Although in theory, either team can say no. Everything's pointing in that direction. Don't be surprised if Deebo Samuel what, Michael?
Don't be surprised, Mike Florio, if Deebo Samuel is the number 3 receiver with the Washington Commanders and not number 2. I love Deebo, his all-pro season where he's catching the ball, he's rushing too. It is great to see him coming from all directions and doing his thing. He's not that player anymore. I just think he is beat up more significantly than anybody is letting on. Not to the point where he's damaged goods and San Francisco traded away a player who shouldn't be on the field. Not that, but I just think the wear and tear on Deebo Samuel is enough where he can't do this stuff anymore. And I think Washington was the right place for him because Adam Peters, the general manager, was in San Francisco and knows him. But I don't think it's a slam dunk that he goes in there and becomes the number 2 option for Jaden Daniels. I think he's a good player, but I can see somebody else emerging, whether it's a draft pick, free agent signing, who we get into the season, that person is the number 2 option over Deebo Samuel.
I'm going to say don't be surprised if he turns the clock back to 2023, not 2021. but he had the great 21 season. He wanted out, and it was all part of the posturing to get his contract, but he skipped the offseason program. He wasn't in shape in 22. Then in 23, he rebounded. More touchdowns, more receiving yards, then fell off a little bit in 2024. I think he's going to turn the clock back to 23. Now, whether that's his number 3 or number 2 remains to be seen. You get a couple of guys that can stretch things on the outside, and Deebo can be a guy who gets the ball underneath and just goes bull in a china shop. That's the thing. It's both an admirable trait and it's kind of dumb that every time you have the ball, you fight for every last blade of grass, even if it gets you injured on the way to getting that final little extra centimeter of yardage. And we've seen him get hurt at the tail end of plays before. He plays with a reckless abandon, and that's good and that's bad. And one of the ways it's bad, the wear and tear. I still think he can turn it back to 2023, not 21, but 23. And if so, that's going to help the Commanders.
Can I tell you real quickly the one I thought about doing for Deebo Samuel? And you'll appreciate this as a Vikings fan. I thought about going Cordero Patterson post Minnesota. I was going to say,
yes.
Don't be surprised if Deebo Samuel has more rushing yards than receiving yards. That they kind of turn him into a Cordero Patterson kind of player.
Yeah, Cordero Patterson was a guy who was a great returner, raw receiver prospect. The Vikings never were able to develop him. His 4th year, that's when he morphed into this special teams guy. He was a gunner on the punt teams. And then he goes elsewhere, and it's like, hey, this is a guy who can do anything. And the Patriots had him. He was with a bunch of different teams, Steelers most recently. That's good. I like that. Okay. By the way, the Commanders have brought back linebacker Bobby Wagner, 1-year, $9.5 million contract with $8 million guaranteed. Hey, he was great. I mean, linebackers aren't supposed to make it this long. He's still delivering at a high level. He was drafted in 2012 along with Russell Wilson in Seattle, and he's still getting it done, Michael, and it's amazing that he keeps going at one of the most physically demanding positions on a football field.
Yeah, I think I like him on the field, Mike, and I don't know if you've ever interviewed Bobby Wagner. He's an impressive guy. Just to talk to all of the accomplishments that he's had. I think he's gone back to school. He's a respected guy in every locker room he's been in, whether it's the Seahawks or Rams or now with the Commanders. So this is a guy, sometimes some fans root for teams. Members of the media tend to root for stories and players. That's a player to root for.
One last don't be surprised if regarding a guy whose first name begins with D. And we had it in, we took it out, and I've asked Gary to humor me on this. And I'll do mine first to give you time to think of one. You may have one, you may not. But Deshaun Watson. Don't be surprised if Deshaun Watson. And here's what I'm going to say. Don't be surprised if the Browns never cut him. People think that maybe next year they'll cut him. I think they're going to keep him through the end of this contract because, and I still need to research this, they've got $135 million in cap dollars that will hit the books after this year. Okay, through 2025, he will have made $184 million. 41% of it will have hit the cap. There's still $135 million that needs to hit the cap. And I believe, the way I understand it, and it gets a little confusing, even when you've been doing it 20-plus years, it gets a little confusing. But I think if they were to cut him next year, I think they end up taking the cap charges faster. I think to do the maximum smoothing of the cap charges, they got to keep him on the team and not cut him through the conclusion of the contract. So that's why I'm saying don't be surprised if that's what they do, because they're still paying him anyway. They owe him $46 million next year. No one's trading for him. They're going to have to pay him every check. They can tell him just stay home if you want to stay home. They can't make him stay home with pay, but they can invite him to stay home like he did all of the 2020 season. Was it 2020 or 21? It was 21 with the Houston Texans. He didn't play at all that year as they were looking to trade him. So don't be surprised if he's never cut by the Browns.
See, Mike Florio is pointing to my head because this is why we're Run PFT. Okay. Hey, classic Run DMC. They finish each other's sentences back and forth. I know where you're going. You know where I'm going. That's exactly the thought I have. That's what I was going to say. Don't be surprised. And I'll take it even further. Don't be surprised if Deshaun Watson is throwing passes for the Cleveland Browns in 2025.
Wow.
This is what they've done. This is what they signed up for. They were so confident that they had their quarterback issue solved. And of course, like, we look at it now and say, well, what the hell were they thinking? Why would the Cleveland Browns do something like this? But you got to understand the Cleveland Browns and their history, the Cleveland Browns part 2, 1999 to the present. Since coming back to Cleveland, they've had so many quarterbacks, so many names. So this is a franchise that would do something like that. So we are going to solve it once and for all, not just for us, but for previous Browns administrations. We're going to solve this, and I want the fans to know that we got a quarterback. And so they gave him that guaranteed contract. They were so convinced that this was the right move that they made a deal that there's really no escape route. There's no easy escape route. The best thing for them is to sit there and take it. They got to sit there and take it. Deshaun Watson is their problem. It's a lot of money that they've spent. So he's going to throw some passes for them in 2025.
It's been 3 years and a lot's happened since then, but I remember vividly what was going on. It was dysfunction fueled by desperation that the Texans created a 4-team competition for Deshaun Watson's services. They pre-qualified 4 different teams, the Saints, the Panthers, the Falcons, and the Browns, on the ability to talk to Deshaun Watson and figure out which team he's going to go to. The fact that the Browns were involved pissed off Baker Mayfield and poisoned that relationship. And then when the Browns were the first team to get the tap at the dance competition, that's when they got desperate and said, we have to make this guy an offer he can't refuse. And they did. That's where the 5-year, fully guaranteed $230 million contract came from. He couldn't say no to that because nobody else was going to give him a 5-year, fully guaranteed contract. And that was when the well was poisoned. And the poison's going to stay in there through next year and beyond as those cap dollars hit. And one last point, I know we have to break. The last time we did this, I introduced my cockamamie theory that if you want Myles Garrett, you got to take Deshaun Watson. By restructuring his contract yesterday and converting the vast majority of his 2025 salary into a bonus, that's not that it was ever going to happen, but there's no way it's going to happen now. Because now instead of sending $92 million to a new team, it would be like $47.75. That it's no longer as attractive to offload Deshaun Watson and his $92 million. And also, it would trigger a much bigger cap charge if you'd move him now. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.